Turn the lights down and get comfortable. Tonight's story begins in the dark. Before we start, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what kind of stories keep you up at night. The forest swallowed me the moment I stepped past the last ridge, a wall of silver birch and spruce so dense that the sunlight fell in pale, trembling threads through the canopy. I hadn't expected this kind of silence, not the ordinary silence of the backcountry, but something thick, layered, like the air itself was holding its breath. Dispatch had been vague as usual. New territory, 250 miles in, mapped roughly by a hiker. Make it safe for hunters and campers. Report anomalies. I had packed for weeks, rations and topo maps, but I hadn't packed for this quiet, this suffocating stillness. I set up a base at the creek the hiker had noted, a ribbon of water that smelled faintly metallic. The map showed no trails, no old logging roads, just a tangle of contour lines and unknowns. I started my survey markers with careful steps, boots sinking into moss and rotting needles, listening to the wet slosh of my own movement. It was easy to imagine this place uninhabited by humans, but the forest didn't feel empty. Something moved just beyond vision. A branch snapped, but it didn't echo. It disappeared. I saw the first of the anomalies by late afternoon. A deer, or what I thought was a deer at first, frozen at the edge of a clearing. Its legs twisted like branches, joints bending at impossible angles. Its eyes were wide, liquid, reflecting sunlight in a way that felt wrong. It stared at me without fear, and I felt my stomach twist, a coil of cold realization tightening. It shifted, and the motion was wrong. Every step it took, it didn't make a sound, but the air quivered, as if the world itself were uneasy. I marked the location in my notebook, shaking, and reminded myself these were isolated cases, biological oddities, maybe severe malformations, nothing supernatural. Rationalization was the only way I kept moving deeper. The further I went, the darker the understory became. Moss clung to everything, trees gnarled with thick, ropey vines, and the smell of wet earth was thick in the air. I adjusted my pack and followed a ridge, listening for the creek behind me. But there was only the strange wind threading through branches, whispering a sound like distant fingernails along metal. By nightfall, I set a small perimeter with reflective markers and a light sensor. I've worked remote territories before, but tonight sleep was uneasy. Every rustle seemed deliberate, a pause and then movement just at the edge of my lantern's reach. I imagined the twisted deer returning. The thought made my chest tighten. My radio crackled once, static, and then a faint voice, indistinct, low, almost human, but not mine. I held the mic close, but the forest only absorbed it, letting it vanish. I stayed awake most of the night, eyes fixed on the dark shapes between the trees. I tried to write notes about the terrain, the slope, the creek junctions, but my hand shook. The trees seemed to lean inward, closer, listening, and somewhere, far enough away to be untouchable, but close enough to know it existed, I heard a low rasp, a sound that didn't belong to any animal I had cataloged. It wasn't a growl or a cry. It was off. It lingered in the underbrush long after I stopped hearing it, a wrongness that threaded through the night. Morning came gray, and the forest felt smaller, more intimate. I adjusted my pack, checked my bearings, and forced myself to step forward, deeper into the unknown. Every sense screamed caution, but I reminded myself that the objective was simple: map, report, keep people safe. Simple, rational. But something in the forest, some presence, was already learning my pattern, watching. I just hadn't seen it fully yet. The morning mist clung to my jacket as I moved deeper along the ridge, each step sinking into the moss like the forest wanted to swallow me whole. The creek I've followed yesterday had narrowed into trickles, vanishing into the undergrowth,
leaving only the smell of wet stone and coppery wetness in the soil. I tried to focus on the map, sketching lines and noting the rise and fall of the land, but the trees seemed different today, older, twisted, their trunks spiraling in impossible directions. I caught myself thinking the forest was alive, not in the normal way, but as if it breathed and watched through bark and leaf. By late morning, I found more evidence of the deer. One stood in a clearing, or what had been a clearing, its legs bent like a folding chair. Its eyes met mine, wide and unblinking, a soft glisten of something fluid inside. It didn't move away, didn't flinch. I froze, trying to rationalize it, but the longer I stared, the more the edges of its body seemed off, elongated, stretching in a way that made me question if my vision was failing. Then, without warning, it vanished. Not running, not slipping into the brush, it simply ceased to be, leaving only the faint scent of damp pine and the hollow echo of something that shouldn't be gone. I pressed on, notebook open, marking coordinates. Hunters and campers needed a guide, and this was my job. Still, every clearing, every shadow carried that same wrongness. Twigs snapped where nothing stood, and I began to notice a rhythm in the sounds, a subtle click, like claws tapping a stone floor, following me from ridge to ridge. I tried to tell myself it was deer or raccoons, something mundane, but raccoons don't walk with the precision of a heartbeat. They don't pause and let the silence grow heavy, letting it press against your chest. Around noon, I stumbled upon the first Wendigo trace, or what I could only call it for lack of a better term. Tracks, humanoid yet elongated, toes curling backward. They wove through the soil with an unsettling deliberation, looping in impossible patterns. I knelt, noting depth and stride, the forest pressing in on every side. There was no sign of habitation, no smell of predator, but the prints made me uneasy in a way I couldn't rationalize. I followed them briefly, curiosity warring with instinct, until they disappeared under a tangle of spruce roots. That's when I heard it. A breath, slow, deliberate, but wrong, high, whistling through branches as if something were exhaling air meant for someone else's lungs. I moved faster, following the ridge toward a secondary creek the map suggested. Shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally, pooling where sunlight should have fallen. I thought I caught glimpses of movement, something tall and gaunt between the trees, but every time I blinked or refocused, nothing remained. My pulse hammered against my ribs, each beat echoing in my ears, but I forced myself to note terrain features, the pitch of the slopes, the density of underbrush, the location of water. Documentation, professionalism, survival. By evening, I set up another small camp on a knoll overlooking the valley below. I lit a fire, though it was half-hearted, more for comfort than light. The woods had changed tone, darker now, as if the day had passed differently than the clock suggested. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, of a presence weaving silently through the trees, studying me. The air had the faint scent of ozone, like something electric had passed nearby, and I shivered, remembering the tracks, the deer, the whispering wind. Somewhere out there, in the dense interior of this untouched territory, something moved, and I had only begun to notice it.
I woke before dawn to the sound of something circling the knoll, not heavy enough to crush brush, not light enough to be wind. The fire had burned down to a low red seam in the dirt, and the cold had settled into my bones, a damp, clinging chill that felt borrowed, not natural. When I sat up, the forest felt closer than it had the night before, trunks leaning inward, their pale bark catching what little light remained like stretched skin. I listened hard, counting breaths, trying to map the sound, but it slipped away whenever I focused on it,
like it understood attention and avoided it. I packed quickly and moved down slope into the valley, telling myself that daylight would bring clarity. It didn't. The fog pooled thick between the trees, dulling distance and swallowing sound. My boots made almost no noise, and that unsettled me more than the silence itself. I paused to mark a boundary tree when I noticed scratches along the trunk, long, shallow grooves, too wide for claws, too uneven for tools. They curved upward, higher than I could reach, as if something tall had leaned close and dragged itself along the bark without urgency. My stomach tightened, a slow sinking pull, and I wrote it down anyway, forcing my hand steady. Further in, I found the remains of a campsite, not recent, but not old enough to belong to anyone on record. A fire ring collapsed into itself, gear scattered, a torn pack half buried in needles. There were no signs of a struggle, no coppery wetness, just absence, the kind that presses in on your ears. I crouched there longer than I should have, a creeping realization sliding through me that whatever had been here hadn't needed force, it had waited. That's when I heard the voice, not loud, not distant, close enough to feel intentional. It sounded like a man calling my name, but wrong in cadence, flattened, each syllable stretched thin, as if it had been practiced without understanding. My throat went dry. Dispatch protocols echoed in my head. Do not respond, do not acknowledge, verify source visually. I scanned the fog, heart hammering, breath shallow. The voice repeated itself, identical, no emotion, no change, like a recording replayed by lungs that didn't belong to it. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming to run, but training held me together. As I moved, the temperature dropped sharply, the air biting at my cheeks, carrying the faint smell of rot and ozone. Shapes shifted in the fog, too tall, too narrow. I caught a glimpse of it then, just for a moment, a silhouette between the trees, elongated limbs bending the wrong way, head tilted as if listening. Its movement wasn't fluid, it stuttered, like frames missing from a film. I didn't breathe, I didn't blink. The forest seemed to pause with me. Then it stepped forward, and the ground didn't sound beneath it. No weight, no presence where presence should have been. My rational mind scrambled for explanations, light, fog, exhaustion, but my body knew better. My legs trembled, heat flushing my skin despite the cold, a primal understanding settling in that I wasn't mapping territory anymore. I was being mapped. The shape withdrew as silently as it had appeared, dissolving back into trees and mist. The fog thinned slowly, reluctantly. I stood there long after it was gone, heart pounding, hands shaking, aware of a single quiet truth settling into me. This wasn't a creature guarding territory. It was something that learned it, and now it knew where I was.
I didn't return to the campsite. I moved until my legs burned and the fog thinned into pale strands that clung low to the ground, each step carrying me farther into terrain the hiker's notes had barely hinted at. The valley narrowed into a long, winding corridor of spruce and black pine, the trees growing so close together that their branches braided overhead, stitching the sky shut. The light turned dim and watery, and with it came a steady pressure behind my eyes, like the forest was asking something of me that I couldn't understand yet. I stopped to drink at a shallow stream, the water moving too slowly, sliding over stones with a thick, syrupy sound. As I knelt, my reflection wavered strangely, stretching my face longer than it should have been. I leaned closer, pulse skittering, and the surface rippled on its own, as if disturbed from below. I pulled back fast, heart racing, and noticed tracks along the bank, Deer prints, dozens of them, overlapping and chaotic. Some were normal, others weren't. Hooves split unevenly, toes splayed wide, impressions sunk too deep for the size they suggested. They all pointed in the same direction. I followed them against my better judgment. The air grew colder with every step, carrying a damp, sour smell that clung to the back of my throat. The forest floor dipped, and I entered a clearing that felt wrong the moment I crossed into it. Sound died there. Even my breathing felt muted, swallowed before it could travel. In the center stood 3 deer, motionless, their bodies thin and warped, legs bent at angles that made my knees ache in sympathy. Their heads turned toward me in perfect unison. None of them blinked. My skin prickled, heat flushing my face as fear crept in, slow and undeniable. I raised my hand without thinking, a useless gesture, and one of the deer stepped forward. Its movement was delayed, like it was catching up to itself, joints sliding instead of bending. Then it opened its mouth. No sound came out, but the silence deepened, pressing hard against my ears until I felt dizzy. I backed away, boots scraping softly, and the deer stopped, all 3 of them freezing again as if waiting for instruction. A sound drifted through the trees then, a low, breathy whistle, uneven, carrying that same wrong cadence I'd heard before. The deer's head snapped toward it. So did mine. Between the trunks, something tall shifted its weight, just out of full view. I saw part of it this time, a shoulder too narrow, skin pulled tight like wet canvas, moving with careful patience. The whistle repeated, closer now, and the deer began to move, shuffling toward the sound with unnatural obedience. I retreated, every nerve screaming. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath fogging thick in front of me despite the effort of movement. The forest creaked softly, a slow settling sound, as if pleased. I didn't run. I couldn't. I moved carefully, deliberately, knowing sudden motion would draw attention I couldn't afford. Behind me, branches rustled in a rhythm that matched my steps a beat too late. By the time I reached higher ground, my hands were numb, my thoughts fraying. I marked nothing. I wrote nothing. All I could focus on was the growing certainty that the objective had shifted. This place wasn't unsafe because of terrain or wildlife. It was unsafe because something here curated the forest, shaped it, practiced with it, and it was allowing me to see just enough to understand that I was no longer an observer. I was part of the environment now. I reached a ridgeline by late afternoon, the climb long and shallow, my legs moving on habit while my thoughts dragged behind me like loose gear. From the top, the forest spread out in a vast, uneven quilt of green and gray, folds upon folds of untouched land that should have felt reassuring in its scale. Instead, it made me feel small in a way that bordered on intimate, like the land knew exactly where I was standing. The wind up there carried a thin, reedy whistle, threading through my pack straps and humming faintly against my ears, and I couldn't tell where it ended and something else began. I stopped to log coordinates, forcing routine back into my hands. North-facing slope, dense conifer, limited sight lines. But the numbers blurred, and my pen hovered uselessly as I noticed something etched into the stone at my feet. Lines, not symbols, not markings anyone taught me to recognize, but shallow grooves worn smooth, looping and intersecting like a path repeated too many times. They weren't random. They followed the curve of the ridge, mirroring its shape, as if the land itself had been traced and retraced until it learned a pattern. A chill slid down my spine, and I stepped back, suddenly aware that I might not be the first ranger to stand here. As I descended the far side, the forest changed again. The trees thinned, trunks taller and paler, bark peeling in long strips that fluttered softly despite the still air.
The smell shifted too, less earth, more of that sharp electric tang that made my teeth ache faintly. I heard movement below me, slow and deliberate, and paused, heart thudding. Through the trees, I saw it more clearly than before. The shape stood upright, impossibly thin, its head angled in a way that suggested curiosity rather than threat. Its limbs bent with a hesitant wrongness, joints sliding instead of locking, as if it were borrowing the idea of a body. It didn't rush me. It didn't need to. It tilted its head and made that sound again, a soft, broken whistle that fluttered against my skin like a touch. My thoughts scattered, logic slipping, replaced by a sudden urge to listen, to step closer and understand. I clenched my jaw, biting down until the taste of copper filled my mouth, grounding myself in the pain. The thing shifted, and for a moment its outline blurred, edges stretching and snapping back into place. Then it raised an arm, too long, fingers barely suggested beneath taut skin, and pointed past me, deeper into the trees. The message was clear without words. This wasn't a warning. It was a suggestion, an invitation. I backed away slowly, never turning, every muscle screaming. The forest responded immediately. Branches swayed without wind. The ground beneath my boots softened, each step sinking just a little deeper than it should. Somewhere nearby, I heard the deer again, their hooves scraping in uneven rhythm, circling. The thing lowered its arm, but didn't follow. It didn't have to. It had already learned enough. When I finally broke line of sight and the ridgeline fell away behind me, I collapsed against a tree, chest heaving, sweat cold on my skin. One thought surfaced, sharp and undeniable, cutting through the haze of fear. This territory wasn't unmapped because no one had found it. It was unmapped because something here decided who was allowed to leave.
Night came too fast. The light thinned without warning, draining from the forest as if someone had turned a dimmer I couldn't reach. I tried to push on, telling myself elevation meant safety, that distance still mattered, but the ground no longer behaved the way my body expected it to. Slopes felt longer than they looked, clearings folded back into trees I was sure I'd already passed. The forest wasn't changing randomly, it was correcting me. I stopped when my lungs burned and the silence grew heavy again, that dense, padded quiet that pressed against my ears until I could hear my own pulse. The air had cooled sharply, carrying the damp scent of old leaves and something sour underneath, a rot that didn't belong to decay alone. I leaned against a trunk and felt vibration through the bark, a faint, steady tremor like a distant engine idling underground. It steadied when I steadied. It paused when I did. I realized then that I hadn't heard birds since morning, no insects either. Even the wind had gone still, leaving only that low, breathing hush woven through the trees. I reached for my radio, fingers stiff, and raised the antenna. Static bloomed immediately, thick and wet sounding, then resolved into a voice, mine, repeating coordinates I hadn't spoken out loud yet. My stomach dropped, heat flushing my face as I shut it off, but the echo lingered, the words still hanging in the air like a residue. I moved again, slower now, every step deliberate. Somewhere behind me, something tall adjusted its posture. I didn't hear it move, but I felt the space change, like a pressure shift before a storm. The forest floor dipped suddenly, opening into a shallow basin, and I knew before I saw it that I'd been here already. My own boot prints scarred the mud, looping in a wide, uneven circle. I followed them with my eyes until they ended at the center of the clearing, where the earth was disturbed, pressed down by something that had stood there for a long time, waiting. The whistle came softly, almost gentle, threading through the trunks from all directions at once. It wasn't calling now, it was practicing. I tasted copper again, grounding myself, but the urge to respond slid through me anyway, smooth and insistent. My hands shook as I wrote one last note in my log. Not coordinates, not terrain, just a warning I wasn't sure anyone would ever read. The deer emerged at the edges of the clearing, their shapes wrong against the dark, legs folding and unfolding without sound. They faced inward. So did the trees. The temperature dropped until my breath fogged thick and slow, each exhale heavier than the last. I finally saw it fully then, standing across from me, its form stretched tall and narrow, skin drawn tight, head tilted with patient interest. It didn't feel hostile. That was the worst part. I understood, standing there in the hush, that mapping this territory had never been the goal. The forest already knew its boundaries. What it needed was reference points, familiar shapes, familiar voices. And as the whistle softened into something almost like my own breathing, I realized with a cold, sinking clarity that it wasn't deciding whether I could leave. It had already decided what I was for.
Where the hunger learns your name. I am 2 days past the last flagged trail, drifting by compass and old survey scars that soften back into moss the moment I step away, and the woods here feel wider than distance should allow, a low green swell of spruce and alder breathing slow around me. The air carries a thin sweetness like wet leaves bruised under boots, and beneath it a pale iron note that keeps returning to the back of my throat. I tell myself it is tannin from the bogs, the long winter leaching into everything, but my hands keep flexing on the straps of my pack as if they know better. I am here to redraw lines after a bush pilot spotted movement where no game should be, and I repeat the objective like a charm while the canopy dims, while the light slides sideways and the forest listens. My radio hisses with a soft, even wash, the sound of a distant river pulled through cloth, and it steadies me until it doesn't. There is a pause, a swallow of silence that presses on my ears, and then a flat imitation of a voice, not words, just the shape of breath laid wrong. I stop and wait. The silence grows heavier, as if the trees have leaned closer. I smell cold resin and something faintly coppery, damp and old, and my stomach tightens while my mind tries to inventory rational sources. Moose wallow, rusted drum, old trapper's cache. The list frays. I find the tracks at the edge of a clearing where snow lingers in shade like forgotten paper. They are too long, the heel drawn out, the toes splayed as if the ground had softened to accept them. Between strides, the earth is scuffed by a dragging arc, not a tail, more like an afterthought. I kneel and feel the soil. It is warm in a way that doesn't fit the hour. My breath fogs, and I realize I have been holding it. A thin wind slips through my sleeves, carrying a dry animal musk that makes my eyes sting, and my thoughts begin to circle, searching for a shape they refuse to name. I move on because standing still feels worse. The forest changes without announcing it, the trees spacing wider, the ground sloping with a subtle insistence that draws me downhill. The soundscape thins, no birds, even my steps seem to sink into a padded hush. Somewhere ahead, something taps, a patient rhythm like knuckle on wood, never quite where I expect it. I tell myself it's frost shedding from branches, though the sun is still high enough to warm my neck. At the creek crossing, I see the bones, arranged with a carefulness that reads like intention. They are clean, pale, set upright against a stone as if to dry. No dark fluid stains the snow, no sign of struggle. The quiet presses closer, heavy as a held breath, and it lands on me all at once that the tapping has stopped because I have arrived, and whatever made this has been waiting in the woods long enough to learn how waiting sounds.
I marked the creek on my map with a shaking pencil, the graphite whispering against paper louder than it should, and I force myself to catalog what I see the way I was trained, because naming details keeps panic from blooming too fast. The bones are not old. They still hold a dull sheen, like porcelain warmed by breath, and when I brush one with my glove, it hums faintly under my touch, a vibration more felt than heard. The smell here shifts, the resin thinning, replaced by something sharp and dry that stings the back of my sinuses like ozone after a distant strike. I straighten too quickly, and the world tilts, the trees swaying as if I am the one rooted wrong. The radio crackles again, not static this time, but a careful mimicry of order, a cadence that almost fits the way dispatch speaks when they're bored and trying not to sound it. Almost. The timing is off, the pauses stretched like sinew pulled too far, and I do not answer. I keep my thumb away from the transmit button and listen to the false voice try again, reshaping itself, sanding down its own edges. My skin prickles beneath my layers, heat flushing my chest, while cold creeps along my spine, and I realize I am being studied through sound. I move upstream because something in my gut insists the bones are a message meant to turn me back, and I refuse to give it that. The creek narrows, water sliding dark and slow under a skin of ice that whispers as it shifts. Each step sinks into the bank with a wet sigh, and the ground feels spongy, alive in a way soil shouldn't be. The tapping returns, closer now, matched to my pace with a sickening courtesy. I stop. It stops. I swallow and taste iron, and the silence grows heavier, pressing against my ears until they ache. Ahead, the trees bend inward, their trunks leaning as if listening to something below the surface. I smell old fur and winter breath, a deep cold layered beneath the day's mildness, and my thoughts stutter as they try to reconcile seasons that should not touch. I remind myself of stories told badly around heaters, of hunger spirits and stolen shapes, and I scold my brain for reaching for folklore when exhaustion will do. Still, my eyes keep searching the shadows for height, for antlered lines where none should be. I catch movement at the edge of my vision, a tall sway between trunks that resolves into nothing when I look straight at it. My heart hammers quick and shallow, and sweat beads along my ribs despite the chill. I force myself to breathe slower, counting, grounding on the scrape of bark under my palm, on the creek's low murmur, on the way the light dims without clouds. The forest feels farther away now, like I've stepped into a pocket where sound and distance misbehave. When I finally see the tracks again, they circle my own, pressed into my earlier prints with a precision that makes my stomach drop. The toes overlap my heel marks, learning my stride, and I understand with a cold clarity that whatever walks here has not been following me. It has been walking with me, just out of sight, close enough to practice being me before it decides to step fully into the open. I leave the creek because staying feels like agreeing to something I don't understand, and the ground rises in a long, patient slope that pulls breath from my chest. The air cools as I climb, not sharply, just enough to make every inhale feel borrowed, and my sweat chills against my skin in a way that keeps my hands trembling. The tapping follows again, softer now, cushioned by distance or intention, and I catch a new sound braided through it, a low whistle that slides between notes like it's testing which ones hurt most. I tell myself it's wind in dead branches, but the trees here are alive, their needles whispering too evenly for chance. My radio wakes with a thin chime, a perfect imitation this time, and my name moves through it with the wrong weight, flattened and careful, each syllable pressed like a leaf in a book. I don't answer. I can't. The name lands behind my eyes and stirs a warmth that feels invasive, like hands rubbing together in the dark. The forest smells suddenly sweet, almost meaty, and I gag, bending forward as the slope steals my balance. When I straighten, the light has shifted again, the sun smeared thin as if seen through ice. I reach a stand of blackened trunks, old burn scars standing like ribs, and the silence here is heavier than anywhere else, a dense absence that presses on my ears. My boots crunch on charcoal and frozen needles, a sound too loud, and with each step I feel watched from above and below at once. The whistle stops. Something exhales. Not near me. Inside the trees. The smell sharpens, fur and frost, and that coppery wetness ghosting the back of my tongue, and my thoughts slide toward conclusions I don't want to make. I see it between the trunks, not all at once, just pieces that don't agree. Height first, too tall, shoulders brushing branches that don't move. Then the suggestion of antlers, not grown but arranged, angles wrong, like a memory assembled from second-hand descriptions. Its skin looks stretched, pale where it catches light, darker where shadow clings like damp cloth, and it moves with a stutter, advancing a fraction, pausing, as if the world updates around it instead of the other way around. My heart thunders and then slows, an awful calm spreading as my body chooses stillness over flight. It tilts its head and the whistle returns, closer, resolving into breath shaped like speech without committing to words. I feel it searching for the right sounds, for the cadence that will make me step forward, and I dig my nails into my palm to anchor myself in pain. The cold here is different, deeper, seeping into my bones, and the weight of the silence thickens until it feels like water around my ribs. When it lifts a limb, the joint bends too far, correcting itself mid-motion with a soft, wet slide, and I realize with a clarity that makes my vision narrow that it isn't showing itself to hunt me, it's rehearsing. The forest holds its breath. My radio clicks once, obedient and empty, and I understand that the name it practiced wasn't for calling me closer. It was for wearing later, when I'm no longer here to object.
My back away without lifting my feet, easing my weight heel to toe so the charcoal doesn't cry out, and my pulse thuds so loudly I'm sure it can hear it, can map me by rhythm alone. The thing remains where it is, tall and patient, its outline blurring at the edges as if distance itself can't decide how close it is allowed to be. The smell deepens, cold fur layered with old damp wood, and beneath it a sweetness that makes my jaw ache. I breathe through my mouth, and the air tastes wrong, thin and metallic, like winter pressed through a coin. The ground behind me changes texture, the slope flattening into a shallow bowl where the snow thins to slick gray patches. My boot skids, and the sound snaps sharp in the hush. The whistle stops. The silence swells. I feel the absence like pressure against my eyes, and then there is movement, not forward, but sideways, a glide between trunks that ignores the clutter of branches. It doesn't hurry. It doesn't need to. The tapping resumes, now unmistakably matched to the cadence of my heart, each beat answered by a soft wooden knock somewhere just out of view. My radio comes alive again, and this time it is my own voice, flattened and steady, reciting coordinates I remember logging earlier in the day. The imitation is close enough to bruise. I clamp my jaw shut and bite down until my molars throb, grounding myself in the ache,
in the scrape of my glove against my sleeve, in the way cold creeps up my calves like water finding a seam. The forest smells suddenly like old snow and iron tools, a memory scent that doesn't belong to this place, and I realize it's pulling from me, sampling what works. I reach the edge of the bowl and drop into it, choosing concealment over distance, crawling beneath a fallen spruce whose branches knit a low roof. Needles rake my pack with a dry whisper, resin smearing my sleeve, and the smell sharpens my focus even as fear hums under my skin. I lie still, counting breaths, counting the seconds between taps. They slow, they stop. Something shifts above me, weight settling with a careful grace that presses the air down until my chest aches. Through the needles I see a shape pass, legs too long, joints negotiating angles they shouldn't, and a hand brushes a branch with a soft, testing stroke. The bark sighs, a sound like cloth drawn across teeth slides through the dark, and then my name again, closer now, wearing my inflection but none of my warmth. My stomach knots, and I taste that coppery wetness as my body readies itself for a sprint it knows will fail. Minutes stretch, my muscles burn. Frost crawls along the underside of the spruce, a fine white bloom forming where breath meets wood. When the weight lifts, it does so without sound, leaving the silence heavier for its passing. I don't move, I don't breathe. The tapping resumes farther away, retreating with a deliberate slowness that feels like mercy, until my radio clicks one last time and logs a location I never transmitted, deep in the bowl where I am hiding, as if the forest has already filed the report of where I will be found.
I wait longer than I think possible, pressed against the cold needles, listening to my own shallow breaths shivering through the hollow of the fallen spruce. The forest has shifted again. The bowl seems narrower, the trees leaning in closer, and shadows curl across the snow like they're breathing. My fingers ache from gripping my pack straps too tightly, but I can't risk moving. Every instinct in me screams that motion will betray where I am. The tapping drifts farther, slower now, as though whatever it is studying the contours of the hollow and cataloging my shape, learning my rhythm without stepping fully into view. I force my mind onto the practical, map coordinates, compass bearings, the slope of the land. I repeat them like mantras over and over until the shapes in the periphery blur into static. Still, there is the smell, fur and old frost, the faint metallic tang lingering in my nostrils, and something else, something I can't name, warm, sour, curling under the pine scent. My stomach tightens. I realize I haven't felt hunger all day. There's no room for it, only this and the slow, deliberate watching. A shadow flits across the far side of the bowl, tall and stilted, and I notice the snow beneath it. Prints too long, the toes splayed, the heel dragging. Not human, not any creature I've ever tracked. The pattern is wrong, the spacing inconsistent, and yet the weight pressed evenly into the frozen soil, deliberate and knowing. I swallow the panic rising in my throat. My breath fogs in the cold air, and I hear it then, a soft exhale carried through the branches, mimicking the sigh of snow settling, mimicking the rhythm of my pulse. I try to stand, my legs protest, trembling, and my mind counts angles. If I move slowly along the curve of the bowl, I might reach the ridge without giving away my position. My foot shifts, a tiny snow crust cracks. The silence presses heavier than air, and I taste copper on my tongue, a warning I cannot ignore. I freeze, and the shadow, long-limbed, jointed wrong, antlered in impossible ways, pauses just beyond a tree. It tilts its head, listening. Then it steps closer,
Not running, not stalking, just stepping, each motion a grotesque mimicry of a human stride. The snow groans beneath its weight, a sound like breaking resin. My chest tightens, my hands clench the pack straps until my nails dig into leather. I understand with the clarity of fear sharpened to a blade that this is not hunting. Not yet. It is learning me, cataloging me, shaping itself from my rhythm, my pace, the angle of my glance. Every instinct screams that if I move, if I try to escape, I will be anticipated, mirrored, replaced. The shadow pauses again, and I feel the forest hold its breath with me. Then the tapping resumes, soft, deliberate, echoing the exact cadence of my heartbeat, synchronized with a precision that no animal could manage. The air smells sweeter now, metallic undercurrents purling around my face. I realize that it is here, waiting for me to make a mistake, to step wrong, to reveal too much. And in that suspended heartbeat of silence, I know the forest has already decided that I am no longer just an intruder. I am part of the lesson, a shape to be remembered, a rhythm to be learned. I do not move. I cannot. I can only wait, counting the seconds that stretch and fold beneath the spruce, tasting the copper and cold, hearing the slow, precise tap of a predator practicing patience, learning the weight of my fear. And somewhere above, in the swaying, shadowed canopy, I feel the shape shift, stretching taller, bending in ways my mind refuses to track, whispering a name it has already stolen from my own lips. I do not move for what feels like hours, though the sun has drifted too low and the shadows have lengthened into a bruised purple haze that presses against the ridge like it wants to fold the world in half. The tapping is constant now, but further away, circling, learning the ground I cannot see. I feel the slope beneath me, uneven, soft, almost alive, and every nerve in my body tells me to run, to scramble the ridge and vanish, but my eyes betray me. They cannot leave the shifting forms just beyond the spruce. The smell is closer now, sharp with wetness, a sweet iron curl that makes my throat constrict and my pulse quicken despite my will. I hear a sound unlike anything I've cataloged, a slow, wet rustle, like cloth dragged through water, but thicker, heavier, deliberate. I freeze, stomach twisting. The shadow I glimpsed before moves again, but differently this time, sliding between trunks without rustling needles, folding its limbs at angles that should snap bone yet do not. It pauses atop the ridge, not looking down at me, but beyond, as if scanning the world itself for permission to exist in it. And then it whistles. Not a call, not a warning, just the shape of a sound, bending through the empty space, resonant, echoing my own inhalations in a way that shivers the skin. I taste the coppery tang again and realize it's my own fear, broken down, expelled through sweat, carried by the air, and that the forest is drinking it. My fingers dig deeper into the spruce needles, leaving wet impressions in the resin, and I count again. My breath, my pulse, my heartbeat, a mantra to keep the edges of sanity intact. The tapping comes closer, the rhythm synchronized with my own limbs. Every step I imagine it mirrors, every subtle weight shift cataloged and remembered. I feel exposed, cataloged, like a specimen under glass, and I understand with icy clarity that it has no need to attack. Observation is enough. Patience is enough. The shadow descends the ridge slowly, deliberately, its gait impossible yet practiced, each joint bending wrong but landing with precision that presses my stomach to my spine. I see the antlers then, long, twisted, branching in ways unnatural but impossibly logical, like some deep forest geometry I am unfit to comprehend. Its head tilts as if reading me, judging the micro-expressions my body cannot hide, memorizing the way I tighten at the smell, the way my eyes flicker toward sound, the way my rhythm falters. I realize then, in the trembling of every limb and the ache in my ribs, that I am being prepared, not hunted, not yet, prepared, a lesson in fear, in patience, in knowing the weight of observation before the first strike. And somewhere deep, cold and glinting, I feel the understanding press down. This creature, this Wendigo, does not take quickly. It waits, shapes itself from the prey, molds the pattern of survival, and only then decides who or what remains. I can hear it moving away now, back toward the edge of the ridge, but the forest feels thicker, heavier, as though it has absorbed the shadow and left its presence lingering, its form etched in the frost, in the resin, in the hollow spaces behind my eyes. My pulse begins to slow, cautiously, but I do not move. I cannot. I am already part of its study. And somewhere, just beyond the ridge, the tapping continues, a rhythm too precise, too human, too wrong. It has learned me, it has cataloged me, and I know, with a quiet, terrible certainty, that this is far from over.
I force myself to move at last, sliding along the slope in the direction of the ridge, each step deliberate, measured, the snow crunching softly beneath boots already slick with ice and resin. The tapping follows, but uneven now, testing me, breaking the rhythm I relied on to measure safety. My breath comes fast, visible in the cold air, curling and dissipating too quickly. The forest tilts again, or maybe it's me, trees bending where they shouldn't, shadows stretching longer than physics allows, the canopy whispering in a low susurrus that presses on my ears. I reach the ridge edge and pause, surveying the hollow I came from. The bones remain where I saw them first, but they seem taller somehow, arranged differently, like they leaned toward me while I wasn't looking. I catch the smell again, sweet and coppery, curling over my tongue, and it makes my stomach lurch. A movement flicks at the edge of my vision, high and lithe, and I spin. Nothing. Only the slow sway of branches, shadows pooling and thinning with impossible fluidity. My pulse hammers, loud enough to echo, and I remind myself to count, to stay grounded in mechanics, compass, slope, bearing, snow, tracks. Then I hear it clearly, a scrape, low, wet, deliberate. Not far, just behind the ridge. I freeze, chest tight, and the whispering sound rises from the snow, curling through my ears, shaping itself into the echo of my own steps. I realize with a deep, hollow sinking that it is moving with me, adjusting, mirroring, learning my weight. My hands shake on my pack straps, cold biting through gloves, sweat and resin mixing into a film I can taste. My head tilts as if trying to see through branches, and something, tall, pale, antlered, slides between trunks without rustling a single needle. The tapping becomes precise, mimicking the rhythm of my breath, counting along with my heart. I feel it in the hollow behind my eyes, in the taut pull of muscle, in the ache of my ribs. Each beat is catalogued, every inhale measured, and I understand with terrible clarity that it is not waiting to strike, it is waiting to know me, to internalize the pattern of survival before it moves fully into the open. The forest itself seems to pulse with the creature, stretching shadows in time with my own movements, warping the sense of distance. I take a single careful step. The snow yields a soft sigh. Behind me the tapping pauses. I stop. Silence swells. A low, wet rustle reaches my ears, a friction that carries intent, careful, deliberate. Then a sound shapes itself,
a mimicry of my own voice, whispering my own name across the ridge with a flat, eerie correctness. My stomach twists, my lungs tighten, and I taste copper again, this time bitter on my tongue. The world tilts slightly, light bending across trees as if correcting to the creature's will. I know I am not alone. I know it is watching from just beyond sight, shaping itself from me, waiting until my rhythm falters. My mind traces the slope, the ridge, the hollowed bones, and I realize with slow, sinking dread that this is far from a chase. This is a study, a patient, deliberate acquisition, and when it finally decides to step forward, I will no longer be merely a witness. I will already be part of it.
I crouch at the ridge, trying to force my thoughts into a neat catalog of steps, distances, and angles, but the forest resists logic. Shadows lean differently than before, bending around trunks that shouldn't allow it, and the air is thick with that coppery, sweet tang, curling through the spruce like smoke that tastes of fear. I hear the tapping again, close now, moving with a patience that unnerves every muscle in my body. It is not a hunt yet, not the strike of teeth or claw, but a study, a weighing of my pattern, a testing of my limits. The wind shifts, thin and icy, carrying a whisper of something alive, something too large to fit within reason. I notice the snow beneath my boots is not uniform. It is compressed in ways that mimic my own stride, angles wrong but precise, teaching me without revealing itself. My pulse hammers, counting too fast against the rhythm of the tapping, and I feel the ache in my spine as the forest presses closer. The trees themselves seem to lean toward me, shadowed limbs reaching like fingers that bend too easily, tracing lines that should not be traced. I take another step along the ridge, slow, careful. The tapping halts, then resumes, broken, deliberate, sliding into a rhythm that mirrors my heartbeat exactly. I freeze, a breath drawn wrong. The shadow moves, tall, angular, jointed wrong, its limbs folding in impossible angles and still bearing weight. Its antlers twist unnaturally, reaching in directions that should unbalance it, yet it moves with an eerie grace. I taste copper again, and I know this is not just fear. I am being studied, broken down, catalogued. I force my eyes onto the shape, trying to reconcile impossibility with observation. It tilts its head, mimicking curiosity. Curiosity I recognize in myself, and I realize it is learning me as much as I am watching it. The forest falls silent, save for the low scrape of snow beneath some hidden weight and the occasional whisper of needles brushing one another. Every step I consider taking is mirrored, catalogued, understood before it is even made. My muscles tighten, my chest burns with the effort to breathe evenly, and the wind shifts, carrying a sweet metallic tang that makes my stomach turn. I whisper my own name to myself, grounding, reminding my mind of reality, but the wind curls around it, carrying it back with a flattening correctness, every syllable precise, as if the forest itself has learned to speak through it. I do not move. I cannot. My body knows instinctively that any misstep would give away more than I can afford. Somewhere above, between the leaning trunks, I sense it watching, measuring, shaping itself from my rhythm, preparing, and I understand the truth I have been avoiding. This is not a predator hunting for sustenance. This is something older, something deliberate, something patient enough to mold me into a pattern it can wear, until it can step fully into the open without error. I taste the coppery tang again, bitter and acrid now,
and the forest feels impossibly close, bending light and shadow, stretching time in subtle ways that make each second feel longer than the last. The tapping slows, withdrawing in a measured rhythm, as though satisfied for now, leaving me crouched on the ridge, my muscles trembling, my mind sharpened and hollowed, and I know, without looking, that the Wendigo waits just beyond my vision, reshaping its study of me with each careful, impossible step it takes.
The ridge seems to have swallowed the light, or maybe it's the forest bending it, draping the world in bruised indigo shadows that press against my eyes. I force my gaze to the hollow I crawled from, counting trunks, measuring angles, memorizing the lean of every bent branch. The tapping has stopped, but its absence presses heavier than sound. I can feel it moving, not toward me, not away, but through the forest like a presence threading through roots and needles, learning the folds of the land, memorizing the slope beneath my boots. Every nerve screams that it knows me better than I know myself. I taste copper again, and this time it is thick on my tongue, hot and metallic. My chest tightens. I remind myself I am trained for this, that I have survived encounters with large predators before, but this is not a bear, not a moose, not anything that breathes with predictable hunger. This is patient, calculating, molding itself from me, stretching shadows to carry its weight, whispering my name through wind and resin and cold air. My mind tries to measure it, quantify the impossible, and fails. Every calculation folds in on itself. A sound shifts behind me, a soft rustle, deliberate, unnatural. I turn slightly, forcing my body to move slowly, to register angles without alerting the unseen. Between the trunks, I glimpse the impossible, limbs bending wrong, antlers that twist against logic, a pale shape that moves in fluid increments that should snap joints, but do not. The tapping resumes, faint, deliberate, echoing the rhythm of my heartbeat, a mockery of the pulse I try to steady. My stomach twists, my lungs burn with shallow breaths. The forest presses close, compressing air, light, and time into a thickness I can taste. I know it is here, shaping itself from me, observing, cataloging. I understand that I am no longer an intruder in this wilderness, but a specimen, a rhythm to memorize, a shape to perfect. I feel the cold seep through my layers, biting deeper than frost should, pressing against my spine and into my marrow. The wind carries its scent now, thick fur and wet wood, layered with that metallic sweetness that tastes of copper and fear and winter decay. I realize that it is practicing, preparing, rehearsing patience before fully revealing itself, and that my every move, every blink, every shallow inhale has been a lesson. I do not move. I cannot. My mind latches on to the practical again, ridge angle, tree spacing, snow depth, compass heading, but each anchor feels frayed, unreliable, bending in ways I cannot trust. The tapping moves again, circling, slower now, a deliberate echo that shapes itself around my rhythm. Somewhere above, a shadow leans just out of view, stretching impossibly, bending impossibly, antlers curved in impossible directions. My chest aches, my stomach twists, and I taste that copper again, thick, bitter, omnipresent. The forest is alive with it, and I understand, as a hollow certainty settles over me, that I am already part of it, cataloged, learned, and nothing I do will undo what has begun.
The light fades fully now, leaving the ridge wrapped in an indigo hush that drapes over everything like wet cloth. The forest seems to hold its breath with me. I move a fraction, careful, testing the slope, feeling the crunch of frozen needles under my boots.
each sound echoes, each movement catalogued. The tapping has returned, faint, precise, almost gentle, that every beat matches the tremor in my own limbs. I taste copper in my mouth, thick and bitter, and it curls down my throat. My stomach knots, my chest burns. The forest itself feels aware, shifting subtly, stretching shadows toward me, pressing the weight of presence into the very air. A rustle brushes high above, in the leaning branches. I catch a glimpse of it, a shape taller than any human, angular, impossibly long-limbed, antlers twisting like frozen lightning. Its movements are wrong yet precise, bending joints in ways my mind refuses to track, and still it carries itself with an eerie grace. I realize it is no longer hiding, only choosing when to reveal, and that timing is cruelly patient. Every instinct screams that if I act too soon, I will fail, yet inaction carries a weight equally terrible. My muscles quiver, anchored to resin and ice, while the tapping and scraping continue their impossible mimicry of my heartbeat. I try to focus on details, the snow beneath me, the slope of the ridge, the exact spacing of the trees, but my mind falters. The forest warps around the shape, light bending, shadows thickening, every branch seeming to move toward the outline just beyond my vision. The scent curls tighter, the metallic sweetness almost clinging to my skin, an intimate pressure I cannot shake. I feel it studying me, weighing the cadence of my steps, the tension in my shoulders, the rhythm of my breath. I understand with a terrible clarity. It is not hunting. It is preparing, learning, shaping the pattern of fear before striking. A low, wet scrape moves along the ridge, slow, deliberate. My pulse matches it, unwillingly. My chest tightens, my ribs ache from holding breath too long. The shadow leans, tilts its head, mimicking the movements of a creature it can only observe in pieces, perfecting its own imitation of me. My stomach twists again, the copper tang now stronger, and I taste it as I breathe, a metallic reminder that this presence is patient, intimate, inescapable. I force my mind to count, to anchor on small concrete details, but the forest folds around the creature, bending sound and sight until every measure feels wrong. I know it is learning me completely. Every shiver, every twitch, every micro-shift in weight is recorded, catalogued, absorbed. And somewhere deep inside, cold and tremulous, I recognize that I am no longer merely observing. I am the lesson. I am the specimen. I am already folded into the pattern it is practicing, a shape to be remembered, a rhythm to wear. And when it finally decides to step fully into the open, it will not need to chase, it will not need to strike. I will already be part of it. The ridge grows darker. The tapping pulses once more, perfectly in time with my own heart. And I realize, with a hollow, terrifying certainty, that the forest has already decided that I am no longer allowed to leave. I force myself down from the ridge when my legs begin to numb, because staying still too long feels like surrender, and the forest does not reward surrender. Each step downward stretches time, the slope feeling longer than it should, the ground softening under my boots as if the earth itself is learning my weight. The tapping follows again, not behind me now, but off to my left, then my right, never settling, testing how I react to uncertainty. The air cools sharply, a sudden drop that prickles my skin, and my breath clouds thick and low, hanging longer than it should before dissolving. The smell changes as I descend, The sweetness thins, replaced by a dry animal musk that clings to the back of my throat, layered with old wood and something like cold iron. My stomach tightens and I swallow hard, my mouth dry despite the taste that won't leave. I keep my eyes forward, counting trees, counting steps, grounding myself in repetition, but the forest resists patterns. Trunks appear where I don't remember them. Gaps close. The distance between landmarks stretches and shrinks in subtle, wrong ways that make my head swim. The tapping stops. In its place comes a new sound, faint and careful, the soft scuff of boots on snow, my boots. The rhythm is imperfect at first, a fraction too slow, then too fast, adjusting, correcting. My spine goes rigid as I realize it's walking parallel to me, not close enough to see, not far enough to ignore. I slow. The sound slows. I stop. It stops. The silence that follows is so complete it rings in my ears, heavy as pressure underwater. I smell my own sweat suddenly, sharp and human, and beneath it that cold furred scent returns, closer now, intimate. The forest feels narrower, the trees leaning inward, their branches whispering together with a soft, dry hiss that slides along my nerves. I feel watched from multiple angles at once, as if height and distance no longer matter. My pulse stutters, then steadies, and I hate that it steadies, that some part of me is adapting to this. A shape moves ahead between the trunks, just for a moment, tall, pale, antlers cutting into the low light like broken branches. It doesn't rush, it doesn't threaten. It simply exists there long enough for my eyes to lock onto it before it slides sideways, dissolving into shadow without disturbing a single needle. My chest burns as I realize my breath has gone shallow again, my body trying to make itself smaller. My radio crackles softly at my hip, and I nearly sob at the sound until it resolves into something wrong. Static shapes itself into breathing, slow, even, matching mine. I shut the radio off, fingers shaking, but the sound continues anyway, now carried through the trees themselves, a low exhale passing from trunk to trunk like wind that knows my lungs. I understand then that distance no longer protects me, movement no longer protects me, stillness no longer protects me. The Wendigo is not tracking where I go, it is tracking how I exist, how I hesitate, how I choose, how fear alters my rhythm. The forest darkens another shade, and the cold deepens until it feels embedded in my bones. Somewhere close, something tall adjusts its posture, correcting its balance, practicing my shape in the dark. And with a sinking calm that frightens me more than panic ever could, I realize I am no longer trying to escape. I am trying not to teach it anything else.
The forest seems to fold in on itself as I move, or maybe it's me folding inside the forest. Every step feels amplified, as though the snow beneath my boots is listening, counting, echoing back the precise rhythm of my weight. I taste copper again, metallic and thick, clinging to the back of my throat. My legs ache from crawling and climbing, but moving feels safer than standing still, though every movement is measured, deliberate, rehearsed. The tapping is constant again, circling now, a slow, patient echo that matches my pulse, my inhalations, my very heartbeat. The trees shift subtly as I descend toward a thin creek I spotted from the ridge. Branches bend at angles that shouldn't be possible, their shadows pooling in ways that twist the world around them. I try to keep my mind on practical things, slope, direction, water, footing.
I force myself to count out steps, measure distances, remind myself that survival is still about observation, about keeping detail. But the forest resists precision. The snow seems softer in places, the trunks closer together, yet farther apart at the same time, like I'm moving through multiple layers of the same forest, stitched wrong. Then I hear it again, a rustle, wet and careful, sliding across the frozen creek bed. Not a strike, not a rush, just measured, deliberate. I freeze, chest tight, stomach twisting. The shadow appears for a fraction of a second between trunks, impossibly tall, long-limbed, antlers angled against reason, skin pale where light touches and darker where shadow clings. I hold my breath, and the shadow tilts its head, mimicking curiosity, studying me, weighing me, learning the cadence of my fear. The tapping resumes, synchronized perfectly to my heartbeat. I feel its patience like a pressure in the air around me, shaping the wind and the cold and the snow to its will. I crouch lower beside a boulder at the creek's edge, hiding what little I can, but I know hiding does not matter. The creature knows. Every muscle twitch, every shift of weight, every shallow inhale is already recorded, internalized. I taste copper and bitter ice, and I know it has measured the patterns of my body, my rhythm, my presence. It is learning how I move, how I pause, how I hesitate. Every step I take now is rehearsed in the shadows behind me before it is even made. My pulse slows reluctantly as I realize the truth I have been avoiding. This is not a hunt. This is not immediate death. It is preparation, a patient lesson in presence, fear, rhythm, and obedience. I am the specimen. The forest itself is a classroom, the tapping my tutor, and the Wendigo moves just beyond sight, adjusting, correcting, perfecting, practicing me. The light fades further, and I feel its shape pressing into the space around me, the shadow lingering in the corner of perception, bending trees and branches, shaping the very air to measure me. And in that quiet, cold realization, I understand. Escape is no longer a question of movement. It is no longer about fleeing. It is about not giving away anything more than I have already offered. The copper tang clings to my tongue. My chest aches. The forest is patient. The shadow is patient. And I am already folded into its lesson. Every rhythm of my body is catalogued. Every motion remembered. And the tapping continues, precise, deliberate, echoing the cadence of a heartbeat it has stolen, shaping me, preparing me, owning me, without ever touching me.
The snow crunches beneath my boots, slow and hesitant, each step an echo of the rhythm the tapping has already stolen from me. I force myself forward toward a narrow pass I glimpsed from the ridge, hoping it would lead to lower ground, to safety. But I know in the hollow of my chest that safety is a concept I abandoned long ago. The forest bends subtly as I move. Branches lean as if to block me, shadows pooling unnaturally in corners, and I feel the air tighten, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. My pulse races, then slows, then races again. I sense it before I see it. A presence sliding through the trees beside me, parallel, matching my stride, invisible yet heavier than air. The tapping resumes, but now it is fractured, echoing off multiple trunks, matching the cadence of my heart, while teaching me how wrong I am to believe I control it. I taste copper on my tongue, thick, metallic, a reminder that every breath is observed, recorded. My legs ache from climbing and crawling, my shoulders tense, and yet the shadow keeps pace without sound, without haste, without error. A low, wet rustle rises from behind a cluster of spruce. I freeze. The shadow appears for a fraction of a second, too tall, limbs bending impossibly, antlers angled wrong but exact, body fluid and wrong in the same motion. It tilts its head at me, mimicking curiosity, learning the pauses in my stance, the micro-adjustments of my weight. I know it is not hunting. It is learning me completely, rehearsing me as one would rehearse a dance, a melody, a lesson in fear. The forest thickens around me. Every sense is amplified. The cold bites deeper than frost. The wind curls around my spine, and the copper tang invades my taste again. The tapping shifts with me, circling, moving closer, farther, closer again, aligning with my pulse, measuring my hesitation. I understand with icy clarity, I am not escaping this. Every instinct, every motion, every calculation has already been anticipated, mirrored, absorbed. It knows me, knows the rhythm of my survival, the smallest flinch, the quietest inhale. I step carefully into the pass. Snow crunches, tapping pauses, silence presses. Then a single exhale rises from the forest, carried through branches and shadow, matching my own breath. I force myself to breathe evenly, to count, to stay anchored in the practical, compass, slope, creek. But the forest does not cooperate. Trees bend subtly, shadows shift, distance warps, as though the world itself is folding to accommodate the creature's presence. I taste copper again, the bitter reminder that I am catalogued, that I am studied. And then, just beyond the next cluster of trunks, I see it fully for the first time. Not running, not attacking, simply standing, impossibly tall, limbs folded at wrong angles, antlers stretching like jagged geometry. Its head tilts, as if examining a specimen. I realize I am no longer simply observed. I am already part of it, integrated into its design, folded into the rhythm it has been perfecting. I step forward, carefully, and the tapping resumes, a patient echo of my heartbeat, shaping me, teaching me, claiming me, without ever touching. I am no longer a ranger. I am already a lesson. The cold curls around me like water, shadows lean closer, and the forest, patient and alive, whispers with anticipation, carrying the weight of something older, smarter, and infinitely deliberate. I am not ready to move, yet I know instinctively that moving will change nothing. I am already part of what waits here, already folded into the rhythm of the Wendigo. And as the tapping circles closer, perfect, inevitable, I understand the last truth. Escape is no longer possible.
I stop entirely, boots pressed into the snow, shoulders locked, every muscle taut and quivering. The forest stretches around me in impossible ways, shadows pooling and curling, the wind pressing against my chest in slow, deliberate waves. The topping has stopped. For a heartbeat, the world is still, heavy, expectant, the silence like frozen water pressing against my ears. I taste copper again, thick and metallic, and I realize that it is not my fear alone. It is the forest itself, infused with the weight of the Wendigo, with its presence woven into every branch, every needle, every fold of shadow. I glance toward the pass, toward the ridge behind me, and the hollow I crawled from, and for the first time I notice the pattern in the snow beneath my feet. My own steps, mirrored and corrected, dragging longer than they should, stretching into impossible spacing. I understand, then, that the Wendigo has practiced me, traced my rhythm, broken it down and reconstructed it as its own. Every step I take is no longer mine. Every breath is catalogued, rehearsed, anticipated. The forest itself seems to lean toward the shape in the distance, carrying its weight, its shadow, its impossible geometry. A movement catches my eye, too slow, deliberate, fluid yet wrong. The shape stands just beyond a line of spruce, limbs folded at angles that defy reason, antlers curling upward like fractured architecture. It does not advance, it does not attack. It tilts its head, mimicking curiosity, studying me as a sculptor studies a clay, as a teacher studies a student who has already learned the lesson. My pulse stutters, slows, then steadies against the rhythm of something older, colder, and infinitely patient. I taste the copper again, bitter, and I feel the cold curling deeper into my chest, threading down my spine and into my bones. I am aware now, with a hollow clarity, that I am no longer a participant in the forest. I am a pattern, folded into something larger, something deliberate, something that has learned me completely without ever touching me. My own voice, if I were to speak, would be an echo of the rhythm it has perfected, a step in a sequence that it controls. The trees sway slightly, not from wind, but from intent, bending in impossible ways to frame the shadow. The forest exhales, carrying a whisper that flattens against my ears, shaping itself like the sound of my own pulse in miniature. The tapping begins again, faint, precise, and for a moment I realize it is not outside me, it is in me, echoing the cadence of my heartbeat, a measure of how completely it has claimed this space, claimed my attention, claimed the rhythm of my survival. I stand perfectly still, tasting the copper in the air, feeling the weight of shadow pressing across the snow, knowing with a quiet, terrible certainty that I am no longer leaving. The Wendigo does not need to chase, it does not need to strike. It has already claimed me in the pattern of my own movements, in the rhythm of my own fear. The forest waits with it, patient, deliberate, infinite. And in that final, frozen heartbeat of realization, I understand, I am no longer a ranger. I am already part of it. The tapping fades slowly, leaving the forest silent, heavy, and impossibly alive. I breathe once, and the sound is mirrored back to me, soft.